Chapter 14, Nervous System, Spinal Cord, and Spinal Nerves, Part 3. So we were talking about dermatomes. These are regions of skin that are innervated by a specific spinal nerve, and it provides a map on the body. And if, say, somebody loses sensation to a particular area of skin, this could be a sign of some sort of damage or potential damage to spinal nerves or to parts of the spinal cord. So, for instance, if the doctor is touching someone along their hand, and when they get toward the medial side, the person says they can't feel the touch, then that may be some sort of damage or irritation to the cervical 8th spinal nerve. Now, it turns out also there's this thing called referred pain, referred visceral pain. And when our organs, our internal organs, experience pain or discomfort, we often feel it on the surface in the skin. And it's not always just where the organ is, it can be quite far from where an organ is. And one thought is that what's happening is that the spinal nerve that innervates that structure, say the appendix, is sort of sending the sensation of pain for the area that that spinal nerve innervates, so that someone who's got appendicitis could feel the pain anywhere around T10 on the right side. So appendix is a little down here, but it's innervated by that, so then the sensation's up here. So you can see it's kind of far from where the appendix is. All right, nerve plexus. A nerve plexus is where a number of spinal nerves have their anterior rami connecting and interweaving with each other, sending neurons between the rami. And we, of course, have these on both the left and right side. The main plexuses include the cervical plexus, brachial plexus, lumbar plexus, and sacral plexus. Cervical, brachial, lumbar, and sacral. And most of the nerves from the cervical and lumbar sacral coccygeal regions form plexuses, except for the thoracic spinal nerves. Most of them do not form a plexus. And the last two spinal nerves, sacral spinal nerve 5 and coccygeal spinal nerve 1, they do not form plexuses, but the others do. And the plexuses lead to spinal nerves that have their own special names. So here's the cervical plexus. Cervical plexus up again in the more superior region of the neck. Cervical plexus comes from a variety of cervical nerves, and it innervates anterior neck muscles, the skin of the neck, and portions of the head and shoulders. And it also has a specific named nerve that you need to remember called the phrenic nerve. And the phrenic nerve goes down and innervates the diaphragm. So the phrenic nerve is critical for our ability to breathe, to control the diaphragm when we breathe. Then we have the brachial plexus in the more inferior part of the neck, heading toward the shoulder. Brachial plexus is supplying nerves for the pectoral girdle and the upper limb. There are 5 major terminal branches that you need to know: axillary nerve, median nerve, musculocutaneous nerve, radial nerve, and ulnar nerve. So the axillary nerve, arrives to the armpit area and then innervates structures on the superior lateral portion of the arm, including the skin and deltoid and teres minor muscles. The median nerve, as we see here, traveling down the middle of the forearm, median nerve, innervates most of the anterior forearm, the thumb and digits. This includes the pronators, flexors of the wrist, flexors and extensors of the digits. Also gets sensory information from the palmar side of the lateral 3.5 fingers. So think the digits 1, 2, 3, and part of 4. Then we have the musculocutaneous nerve, coming out over here. The musculocutaneous nerve innervates muscles in the anterior arm, so biceps brachii, brachialis, that sort, and receives sensory input for the lateral region of the forearm. Sensory from the skin of the lateral region of the forearm. Then we have the radial nerve. Radial nerve runs along the side of the radius. When you get to the forearm, it innervates the posterior arm, so triceps brachii, as well as the posterior forearm and the various muscles that extend the forearm, supinate the forearm, extend the wrist and digits. Also receives sensory signals from the posterior arm and forearm, so along the posterior side of the upper limb, and the dorsolateral hand. Then we have the ulnar nerve. Surprise, surprise, the ulnar nerve ends up running along the ulna. Ulnar nerve innervates some of the anterior forearm and most of the intrinsic hand muscles. So lots of tiny muscles in the hand that it innervates. So flexors of the wrist and digits and all those little bitty muscles in the hand that help to move those structures. And then also the sensory information from the skin of the dorsum and the palmar medial 1.5 fingers, so the remaining 1.5 fingers, as well as the dorsum, the back of the hand. All right, the intercostal nerves. Intercostal nerves do not form plexuses. So they are basically the anterior rami of the spinal nerves T1 through T11. They go out, traveling between the ribs, and they innervate the structures on the anterior and lateral chest wall. So not the organs in the thoracic cavity, but the wall itself. T7 to T12, those spinal nerves also innervate some of the intercostal muscles, but also some of the abdominal muscles and overlying skin. So T7 to T12 also go down to the abdominal area to innervate some of the abdominal muscles and overlying skin. Lumbar plexus down in the near the pelvic area. The lumbar plexus includes spinal nerves L1 through L4, and it will split into two main nerves, the femoral nerve and the obturator nerve. The femoral nerve is an anterior nerve. It innervates the anterior thigh muscles, including sartorius, the quadriceps femoris muscle group. So it helps to do knee extension and hip flexion. And it also receives sensory information from the anterior and inferior medial thigh and medial leg. So down here and this area. Obturator nerve is over here. Passes through the obturator foramen. It supplies the innervation for the medial thigh muscles, so those muscles that engage in adduction. And it also helps to do some sensory signals for the skin of the superior portion of the medial region of the thigh. So closer to the pelvic region, closer to the genitals. All right, then we have the sacral plexus, which isn't quite as plexus-like, but still is considered a plexus. Way down here. It is composed of spinal nerves L4 through S4. And it innervates the gluteal region, the pelvis, the perineum, directly underneath the genitals, the posterior thigh, and almost all of the leg and foot. So it innervates a large portion of the lower limb. Just probably why it leads to the formation of the sciatic nerve, which is the largest, thickest nerve in the body. So sciatic nerve on the posterior side, longest and largest nerve, extends into the posterior region of the thigh, where it's innervating posterior muscles and skin of the thigh. And then it continues down, and when it gets to the leg, it splits into the common fibular nerve and the tibial nerve. The tibial nerve innervates the hamstrings muscles and parts of the adductor magnus, as well as supplying innervation to plantar flexors of the foot and flexors of the toes. So muscles in the posterior side of the thigh and down to the back of the leg. The common fibular nerve innervates part of the biceps femoris, which we know is an anterior muscle, and flexors of the knee, and then it splits into two more smaller nerves, the deep fibular nerve and the superficial fibular nerve, to innervate the remaining structures in the leg that the tibial nerve didn't innervate. All right, reflexes. Reflexes are pre-programmed. They are rapid. They're involuntary. And when they are coming from the spinal cord, they do not utilize the brain at all. So the brain is not involved in causing these muscular movements to occur, or any other reflexes. Not all reflexes are muscular. So again, automatic bypasses the brain. So for instance, if you touch something hot or touch something pointy that hurts you, it'll send sensory information to the spinal cord that will lead to an immediate control of the relevant effectors to move away from the source of pain. So there are some different types of reflexors. We have the monosynaptic reflexors. They are the simplest, most direct of the reflexes. So they have the stretch receptor that detects the sensation of stretching, and then a sensory neuron carrying the information to the spinal cord that will then synapse in the anterior horn with a motor neuron that then goes to the relevant effectors, causing it to contract. So for instance, when the doctor hits your patellar ligament with a rubber hammer, that will stretch receptors in the quadriceps muscle group, and that will lead to a signal causing the kick. And this always seems a little weird to us because it occurs without our brain telling it to. So we're like, whoa, look what we just did. Polysynaptic reflexes involve more than two neurons, so they are more complex. It can be very complex or somewhat complex. So the withdrawal reflex, when we touch something that hurts us, is somewhat complex. So you feel a sensation of pain. The sensory neuron carries the information to the spinal cord. It synapses with an interneuron, maybe multiple interneurons, and then an interneuron will synapse with the motor neuron that sends the command to the effectors to pull away from the painful stimulus. So a minimum of 3 neurons: sensory neuron, interneuron, and motor neuron. Although again, it can get more complex than that. So stress reflex, again, monosynaptic reflex. We have this sensory receptor structure called a muscle spindle. Within the muscle spindle are intrafusal muscle fibers that are connected to sensory neurons and wrapped around by a sheet of connective tissue. And they are also innervated by some gamma motor neurons. And the muscle spindle's job is to detect stretch in the muscle organ. And then there are also extrafusal muscle fibers. These are the muscle fibers outside of the muscle spindle, which is pretty much the rest of the muscle. And the cool thing is no matter how relaxed your muscle is, the intrafusal muscle fibers are always a little bit taut. They can detect the stretching. So you get an unexpected stretch in one of these muscles. The receptor sends a signal via the sensory neuron to the spinal cord. That will then synapse with both interneurons and directly with a motor neuron that will then carry a signal to that muscle to cause it to contract. So muscle spindle detects stretch. Muscle stretch stimulates the nerve signal to the central nervous system. The sensory neuron then synapses with a alpha motor neuron, and then the alpha motor neuron carries the command to contract to the muscle. So, and then there'll also be synapsing with interneurons, and these interneurons will then send signals to, say, antagonist muscles to have those other muscles stay relaxed, because in order for, say, the biceps brachii to lead to a motion, the triceps brachii has to be relaxed to allow that motion to occur. This will stop for here.